Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by Tara Maritzer and Lisa Clowery from OneDrop. Tara and Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
So for listeners who are hearing about you and your organization for the first time, could you explain a bit about who you are, and then we'll move to what the organization does next. So who you are and what you do at OneDrop, please.
Our sincere pleasure. So for anybody who's listening to our podcast, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you have decided to take a moment. I am so honored to be called an everyday superhero by Alex. That is one of the best titles, and I think I will add it to my job description, which is currently the Donor Relations and Corporate Development Advisor for the OneDrop Foundation. I have been with the foundation for around 3.5 years, and it has been a very exciting and fabulous learning experience. And I'm so excited to be sharing this podcast with my friend, colleague, boss, and mentor, Lisa.
Hi, well, that's so kind of you. Thank you, Tara. My name is Lisa Clowery. I am the Chief Philanthropy and Corporate Development Officer at OneDrop. I joined the team, oh my goodness, now it's close to coming to 1.5 years. And it's been such a joy working with Tara and our team. We're really an organization that we believe in purpose and everything that we do and collaboration. And to that point, what our organization does do is we are a foundation. It's called the OneDrop Foundation, where we envision a better world where all have access to living conditions that allow empowerment and development. Our mission is to ensure sustainable access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene for communities facing extreme barriers through innovative partnerships, creativity, and the power of art.
I definitely think it's a really good point to highlight sustainable. And it's one of the pieces that really helps to highlight the OneDrop Foundation in all of the water, sanitation, and hygiene, the WASH charities that are out in the world, that we try to make our projects sustainable, long-lasting, and good for the world, even a little bit better than what they are already.
And to that point, I would just say too, is that we don't do it ourselves. We don't do it just by ourselves. We have to work in collaboration with other stakeholders and like-minded organizations to be able to bring these projects to life and to make sure that they're sustainable over the long term.
I just want to make sure it's clear on in this definition or this context, what does sustainable mean?
That after a project is completed, if we go back, 2 or 3 years and go back in time to see if the measures we put in place are still functioning, if the population that we were working with or that we did interventions with, that they're still using the initiatives that we brought to their community, that they're still, let's say, hand washing, that was part of the issue, or making sure that a large percentage of the population are still doing the behavior change that we brought into place in the project to begin with. Because each project we look at designing what the community needs, and they're part of that. They're part of that change. We include them in that. So they identify certain behaviors that they need to address to make sure that the infrastructure that we're putting in place or the capital that we're putting in place works for them. And so after a project is completed, we will go back and to make sure that all the initiatives that we put into place are still being followed. And that's how we do our reporting, and that's how we show that programs are sustainable.
Is there a typical time period you go back after? Like if your project is, let's say, 2 months, you go back after 6 months. If it's a year, you go back after...
So let's start with that. No project in the OneDrop Foundation is shorter than a 3-year project. And on average, we're closer to 5 years, because we don't want to be colonial at all. We really are integrating into the local ecosystem, having people on the ground that are from that community, and true long-lasting change takes time. Ask anybody who's done a fad diet, they gain the weight back in a week. Anybody who's really done a full lifestyle change, started to exercise, really changed their eating habits, that has a long-lasting effect. It didn't happen quickly.
Good point. Okay, so 3 to 5 years. And then let's say, for example, after that time period, do you have an approximation of when you would go back to make sure everything is still being followed as planned?
Well, I would say there's 2 things that might happen. In a lot of our programs or our projects, there's often a phase 2 component. So by definition, because we're scaling up and scaling out, we get to do that reporting and we get to see how the first phase worked out. So when we have different phases, that already allows us to check within a year timeframe, I would say the results from the program. If there isn't a phase two, what typically is done is then, after a 1 year or 2 year period, we will go back with our local partners on the ground, because we work locally all the time. When we do social art for behavior change, we work with local artists that we call, agents of change. And so we can work with them and other NGOs who are probably still in the region, and we can get our reporting from them. So it's done in different phases and done differently depending on the projects, but always going back. We call that, MEL. So measurement evaluation work is very important, because even for our funders, they want to know that the money that they invested in or were part of a project has something meaningful that came out of it. And so that's why it's really important for us when we do international development work to always go back and measure the impact, and also to measure the sustainability portion of the project.
And you mentioned you guys don't actually do this yourself, so you must rely on partnerships to do this, right?
Absolutely. Partnerships are a collaboration in a more broader sense is one of OneDrop's core values and one of our closest values. We work with co-financing. We work with partners on the ground. We call them executing partners, with the ones that are doing most of the work on the ground. We work with corporate partners and funders and individual donors. Every piece is part of an ecosystem that helps to bring strong and long-lasting change. One of the metrics that we use for that, and I'll use that term a little bit less technically than it probably should be, is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, which is partnerships for the goal. That the Sustainable Development Goals, which help guide our mission, are not able to be truly achieved on your own. It has to be together.
You said that's rule number 17, so I imagine there's 16 before it and maybe a few
There
after.
are 16 before it. 17 is the final one. OneDrop focuses at its core on the SDG number 6, which is clean water and sanitation. But from having clean water, other of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are impacted. For example, number 3, good health and well-being. If you have access to clean water and sanitation measures, you have a higher chance of being healthier. We saw through the pandemic, washing your hands, having access to clean water and soap helped a lot of people be less sick. Also connected for SDG number 5, gender equality. It is well known that women and girls, young children, bear the brunt of the work to have to go and collect water if it's not easily accessible, if it's further away. And on average, this statistic might be a little bit out of date, but on average, walk 5 kilometers to go and fetch clean, safe water for their household.
That's a long distance.
We often say that out of all the 17 SDGs, number 6 is sort of the backbone. It is the backbone and the interconnector of all the other SDGs, because if you do not have water, you cannot solve other SDGs. And right now, what we're seeing more and more is climate, right? The climate adaptation, the climate
Absolutely.
action. And our organization plays a key role in ensuring that we are addressing climate. Here in Canada, I mean, as you know, we're a country with a lot of water resources, but yet in Canada, there are so many communities that don't even have proper water access. And now, looking at the different climates that's even affecting our own country, I know you look out west and there's droughts that impacts, crops, that impacts water tables, that impacts water quality, and we're living that here. So imagine in other countries where they're facing extreme climate issues, and more, we're going to be seeing more floods, more droughts, populations that are going to have to leave their own communities and seek out water.
From the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from 2022, this calendar year, 3.3 to 3.6 billion people are living in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change, meaning that when these floods, fires, storm, rising sea levels come to fruition, they are not in a place to be able to adapt or mitigate it.
Wow.
Yep. And if they have to move, there's the whole issue of sanitation. Sanitation plays a huge role. And, children who get sick because there's not proper sanitation or water, meaning, they may go to sources to get their water, and then, their children will drink out of that water. And you can just imagine children below the age of 5. I don't know the stat offhand. Maybe you have that, Tara, but under 5, the children dying of diarrhea related.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not the stat, but healthier people are better equipped to deal with climate disaster. And with the projects that we do, we aim to reduce the exposure to chemical contamination in the water, waterborne diseases, which are aggravated by climate disasters such as floods or droughts. Excess water or not enough water both have adverse effects, and not having clean water at its core is terribly impactful.
Exactly.
You mentioned Canada, but it seems like, or it sounds like, most of the work you do is outside of Canada. What would be the main regions of the world that you help?
Well, we are in India. We are in West Africa. We are in Latin America, and we are in Canada. And Canada and Latin America are going to be big focuses for the organization. We are actively right now in 14 countries currently, and we have projects that are ending in this year up until 2026. We'll be still funding those projects, but we want to focus here on Canada because although we are doing a lot of international work, we see there's a big challenge here in Canada, especially with Indigenous communities, and we want to be here for them. We want to be part of a consortium of other like-minded organizations as well, making sure that we can help these communities with proper water access. I mean, there's all these boil advisories across the country. What can we do right now to make sure that all Canadians have access to clean water? The government here in Canada has earmarked a large portion of money to the tune of like $1.5 billion to resolve the issue. But the issue is that a lot of companies and organizations are working in silos. So how do we work together to make sure that between now and 2030, we're able to resolve these issues and all the promises and commitments that are being made, that they are executed. So we'll be doing a lot more work here in Canada. And in Latin America, we have a very successful program called Lazos de Agua. We're just finishing the first phase, and that was working with 5 countries. And great results came out of that. It was a co-creation and co-collaboration with some other conveners and funders in that project, namely FEMSA, Coca-Cola Foundation, and IDB, the Inter-Development Bank, and us as well. And this program was so successful that we are looking at trying to bring in a second phase, but that requires OneDrop to go out and seek those funds along with the other conveners to make sure that we can do that. And so we want to go from a 5-country project to a 10-country project, and to be able to reach at least 1 million people with the A, B, and the C part. So the access to water, behavior change, which is our niche, and then also the capital that we want to bring into the community. So a lot of our focus will be there. But again, if you look at what's happening in the world, in the landscape, there's still a lot of projects happening in India. And because we have had successful outcomes and relationships there, we want to continue those as well. And we have another big project that, in collaboration with Global Affairs Canada and a few others in Burkina Faso, called Essed Shahel. We want to continue that, and that will be, I guess, a focus in 2026. So all this to say is, when we do look at our projects, we have to have a lens on long term. As what Tara was saying earlier, our projects are never 1 or 2 or 3 months. It's always a 3 to 5, and sometimes a 7-year project. So when we decide to embark, we have to look at, okay, what is our portion? What can we bring to the table? What's the funding that we need to go and get to secure, our position? And how can we leverage what we do, which is a social art for behavior change, because that is also known as a technical service. So we can bring that in too. So we typically bring in funding and our services, but because we're a foundation, we're a bit of a hybrid foundation. So we have to go and get that money ourselves. So that means being able to promote the projects, going out to seek funding with, either grant organizations, funders, corporations, and getting them involved in the project itself. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes, I would say, before we even get to begin to work in a project. So we have to make sure we dot our I's and cross all our T's, and make sure that, the funding that we go get, we have it for multi-years. Because of the projects, they're so long, we have to make sure that the money or the commitments are there to be able to ensure that we can even begin.
Let's go back to partners for a second. because I know we could talk about this for a long period of time, but I think there's a lot of value in knowing how do you, because there's a lot of partners in play. You said co-finance, execution, core, funders, and I think it was one
all the
other
way
one
up to
that,
government officials,
right.
because when you're doing something, especially in our Latin America program, we work in very rural areas that require a great deal of support.
So how do you get that, like without going too far into detail, because I know this could be a long conversation, but maybe at a high level, how do you achieve those partnerships? Like how do you begin that process and strengthen that process to be able to do what you guys do?
Well, historically, before the pandemic, a lot of the funding that came through a lot of the events because of the fact that we are closely linked to Cirque du Soleil. We were able to do, some great events with them, whereby, people that would come to these, there were auctions, they would, sell out lots, they would have access to special evenings where people would come in and buy tables and tickets and stuff, and that for many years was a big core of the revenue streams coming in, and it was really lucrative. And also our founder Guy Laliberté would help out certainly in the beginning when he kicked off the foundation 15 years ago. He did inject some money at that time. Now fast forward, pandemic happened, there were no more events. So the organization quickly had to look at, okay, how do we diversify our revenue and make sure that, moving forward, we have a foundation of, money coming in. So my role with Tara and a few other people on our team is to identify partners that we already know have maybe business interests in certain regions and that they have already expressed a desire to be part of a program. So our job is to look at our prospect pipeline and identify corporate entities. And then we also look at foundations because there are a lot of grants on the international development side. I mean, there are so many, but we have to comb through them and look at the ones that make sense for us to apply on. So there's a lot of work in prospecting. And then when you do identify a partner, you have to make sure where you bring them in, you talk to them, you give them what's their ROI, how can they play a role, everything you typically do in any type of organization. You have to build your value prop and why it would be important for them to get involved. So, in our case, because this is a new department, we're starting this now going into about a year and a half. We're lucky. We have projects that really resonate with certain partners. For instance, Canada, working with Indigenous communities, there are a lot of interest from an array of different partners wanting to get involved, and even the general public. And we'll talk about technology in a minute, but we also want to make sure that there's more awareness happening out there, even with the general public, knowing that they can definitely play a role by making a donation because every dollar counts. And so being able to put in place online campaigns, being able to talk about the funding, of how much funding is required for X project, but what does that mean tangibly for an individual donor? If they're giving $10 a month, are they making impact? Yes, and we're able to quantify and show that and measure that. So knowing that to solve all these issues and to reach all these vulnerable populations or people that are facing extreme barriers, it takes a lot of people behind the scenes to be able to make that work. And in order to do so, we have to make sure that our communication's on point and our website's on point, our technology's on point. And this is probably a good segue to get into the other
the flip side
points.
For sure. But I do want to highlight one thing that you said a little bit earlier on is that we have been a foundation and working on projects and executing great works for 15 years now. That's not a small feat for any type of nonprofit. We actually celebrated our 15th anniversary this weekend. We're being recorded on October 31st. Our 15th anniversary was the 29th. And so that longevity definitely helped to inspire confidence that we're not going anywhere. The work that we've done, we've got obviously all the reporting, the statistics, what we've been doing has been going well, working, and we're constantly looking at how to make improvements to be even better.
You mentioned talking about the impact that you have, trying to measure that to make sure that the people who are donating, who are contributing, feel that their money is being well used. You mentioned MEL or MEL. What other kind of measurements do you have to be able to report to your constituents that, here's the impact of our good work?
Absolutely. Well, one of the great ways that all charities, and I would suggest to anybody, if you're curious about this, to go and look it up in Canada anyway, there is a service provider called Charity Intelligence that goes and looks at a variety of foundations and scores them on various measurement components. OneDrop gives various details to this place and has a 4-star rating on Charity Intelligence, including a grade A in results reporting. And one of the biggest factors of that is the sense to the cause.
Yes.
So that means for every dollar donated after the overhead costs, fundraising, admin, and management, that we have a certain amount that is going to the program in itself. And OneDrop is very fortunate to have a great endowment and some sizable support behind us and has a very strong dollars to the cause.
And I'd even add to that, because this is something that's been important for me coming into the organization to understand what we can communicate to be able to attract, funders and donors to come on board, especially the general public. And again, it comes down to what can you measure and what can you communicate. And I know last year with the finance team, we did a big analysis just to understand what could be the ROI. And we know that because we work in consortium and there's different partners coming to the table with funding, every dollar that's invested, there's a $7, I'd say, return. We can leverage $7 more into the program, which is huge. And working with Tara, we're even to the point where we're almost able to communicate what that would represent if someone were to give $1. How many people that could actually help. And so, we're happy because we know that a dollar can go a long way within the organization. And
Absolutely.
It's important for people to know that, because when they see some of the projects that we're working on and they see the amount of investment that it requires, because some of these projects, because they're multi-year, are many, many millions of dollars, right, of contributions, but not just from us, from other players. But we can bring that down to show that even someone giving $10 or $1 does have an impact. And that's important to communicate.
That's awesome. Yeah, because that kind of feedback really inspires other people to join. I think it's
Exactly.
one of the reasons why I believe most people contribute is that they want to be able to see the impact of their dollar. And to your point, if even you can measure it at the dollar level, that's amazing.
We're working on getting down to that.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think that we've been really good at the last couple of years, especially, is the storytelling piece. So rather than us communicating numbers and stats, okay, well, we injected this amount of money, we wanted to make sure that X number of people were impacted, because we have all those measurements and that's all quantifiable, quantitative data on everything we do. But the storytelling piece is even more important, because you're hearing from people from the communities about how the program changed their life.
So to pull out a stat for you, that 318 schools gained a better wash-in projects ending in 2021. And this is in a stat in India. In 2021 alone, we did 35 schools. And so the story behind this of the burden of fetching water that falls to women and girls, we get that great statistic like, oh, there's better wash facilities in the schools. But the story behind it, speaking to someone who lives in this community and is benefiting from the project, getting to hear their story is extremely strong.
That's amazing. So you mentioned, Lisa, a bit earlier, technology, and that's obviously where the direction I'd love to go into next, because there's a lot of moving parts here, right? A lot of people you need to keep in touch with, a lot of different kinds of organizations you track. So how do you do it all? Where do you put all this information?
Well, I'm going to flip that question over to Tara, because she's really been the person who's been managing our database pretty much since I got here. And I just want to say we have great ambitions to even bring that, I would say, more adopted across the board within the organization by getting more and more people even to use it. But I'll let Tara talk about what we're using and where we'd like to go.
Definitely. So going into a bit more of like the backstory. So as we had said a little bit earlier, the OneDrop Foundation was started by Guy Laliberté, and it was started at the time that he was still very involved with the Cirque du Soleil. So in order to help mitigate a lot of the startup costs, a great deal of the software that OneDrop began using and does continue to use was adopted because the Cirque du Soleil was using this software at the time. I can't speak to what they use today, but 15 odd years ago, this is where they were on. And the CRM that they were using at the time was Salesforce. So it was easy to just branch off from them and set up another profile under OneDrop to be able to populate what we needed. And since 15 years and a great deal of evolution, we have continued to remain on the Salesforce CRM software for a number of reasons, but very much that the customization possibilities are pretty endless, which is a bit of a double-edged sword. It means that it can do anything you want, but it takes a while to figure out how to make it behave in the way that you want it to. We also, in the pandemic, have taken on, like everybody else, to virtual conferencing using both Zoom and Teams. Because we are a national, international charity, some softwares work better in different countries. Zoom is an easier platform for someone in India to use, whereas Teams doesn't function so well at a great distance. We also fully use the Microsoft Office suite on SharePoint. So we are on the cloud, which I have to tell you only happened in late 2019, early 2020 is when we moved on to the cloud. We were still using servers up until then. So very good timing on our part, I have to say. And then recently, with our exciting foray into new revenue streams and peer-to-peer fundraisers, we have started using Raisin, aka New Media, as our peer-to-peer platform.
Let's talk about Salesforce for a moment, because that's obviously my favorite topic, let's call it. So 15 years of Salesforce, that's a long time. There are not too many organizations that have been using it for such a long time. And you mentioned customization. So these customizations, I imagine, evolved over time, or was there a certain number of customizations that happened at the beginning, and you're kind of just living with what you've gotten so far or built at the beginning, and then have, what would be your plans for going forward for that system? Is it something you want to stay on, upgrade? Because obviously there must be certain upgrades that have happened since then that you might want to take advantage of.
Definitely. And one to the point of is now the Nonprofit Success Pack, previously known as the Nonprofit Starter Pack. And when OneDrop started on Salesforce, that NPSP with either acronym wasn't quite to the caliber that is today. So the way that the Salesforce system as we have it now is made to work in a nonprofit-minded way is probably not the one that I would have liked to stay on. I think that the new NPSP has a really robust offering of what is available. And to be something that's native, I personally prefer it a lot. I know that Salesforce is definitely made to have third-party apps and a lot of great integrations, but I, as much as possible, like to stay native, and that's more of like a personal preference than a organizational position.
No, it's a good strategy. You want to stay as out of the box as possible, as native as possible. And then besides the Salesforce itself, is there any other systems that connect to it? Do you have like a marketing cloud or any kind of donor management portion of it?
Well, what we do have that I use every month is our newsletter integration. So OneDrop uses iContact to send out our beautiful newsletters, which you should go and subscribe to, podcast listener, which I actually think integrates really, really well. It's very seamless to be able to create the beautiful newsletter template, bring in the fields as needed, create the campaigns within Salesforce of whom we want to be sending a particular newsletter to. At minimum, no matter what newsletter is sent out by the OneDrop Foundation, we segment by language. We think it's really quite important at the moment, English and French, but hopefully in the not too distant future, Spanish will be a more permanent language offering, and it is growing. Our impact report, our annual report that we put out each year, is now 100% offered in English, French, and Spanish. And that is now our standard because of our great work and growing work coming in Latin America. But at minimum, no matter what, the newsletter is segmented into English and French. And then depending on the targeting or something more particular that we're doing, we can segment even more with all of the great data that's collected in Salesforce, not have to go elsewhere to go and source that. I think it's wonderful to keep it all in the same space.
I'm curious to know what you like most about Salesforce.
What I like the most about Salesforce, that is a very difficult question, my friend Alex, because there is so much that I've learned that Salesforce can do, and I'd like to be able to use more of it. There is a lot of workflows and different automations that are ready to go in the system to help make the lives of our team better. I just don't have so much of the knowledge to be able to use them, but I love that they're there and I want to be able to do more with them, which sort of links to what I don't love about Salesforce is it's not very intuitive. Trying to figure out if I'm a school of hard knocks girl, so figuring things out is the way that I attack most problems. And Salesforce is a big problem to undertake. Problem might not be the most polite word, but it is not very intuitive.
With great power definitely comes great responsibility. And the thing about Salesforce is that by being a platform more than just a CRM, there isn't one way to do something. To your point, it's a double-edged sword, you called it, right? So
yes.
You need to it's more about guidance and knowing what the best practices are and maybe what they're coloring between the lines, or as opposed to here's the way to do it. In Salesforce, it's one way and one path only. So knowing how to use it and how not to use it really is something that takes practice and time. And sometimes,
Yes.
if your focus, and your focus is on your mission, right? You shouldn't have to put on so many hats where you're also the Salesforce administrator. So it might make sense to have a Salesforce consultant, for example, come in and help you, with certain aspects of the system.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
definitely one of the nice perks with Salesforce is that there is a great external support network, which is how, you and I came to connect, is that, as you said, well, in nonprofits, people wear a lot of hats. Your job description is never your job description. But that when I needed help and I'm trying to learn something, that was a very great support to have you, Alex.
It's my pleasure. You guys are doing great work. It's a pleasure, yeah. So you already answered the question about what you don't like about Salesforce, which is great because I don't think it's always the right. No, it's quite all right. I think there's some wonderful things about it. Even myself, being in that system day in, day out, there are some parts that are not the most amazing. So I'm always curious to know about the downsides of it because I don't want to paint a picture that it's all roses and rainbows kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep all your stuff in Salesforce. You got your eye contact. You got various other technologies like the Zoom, the Teams, the Office. Anything else that's kind of connected to the CRM that helps you do what you do?
Absolutely. The last one that at least I interact with regularly is a software called Conga. Because we are not on the NPSP and are just on Salesforce Regular, issuing tax receipts, which is a very big part of being a nonprofit and a registered nonprofit. To that point, OneDrop is registered in Canada with the CRA, in the United States with the IRS, as well as in the United Kingdom and Spain. So through our registrations in the European Union, we are also part of transnational giving, meaning that we're able to issue tax receipts to donors all around the world. So when you gift to OneDrop, you do get that double-edged benefit of being able to support a great cause, but also, a little bit of savings on your taxes. But to go back to the Salesforce as a standard CRM system is not built to send out tax receipts like the NPSP is. So we use Conga to be able to build out the workflow and issue our tax receipts, which I think are actually quite beautiful. They have this lovely little drop motif and pretty colors because OneDrop, as one of our values, is fun. We're a very colorful foundation. We like to inject levity into what is truly a very serious topic, not having access to safe water, sanitation, or hygiene.
Just a slight correction, actually. NPSP sadly does not do tax receipting for CRA tax receipts. Yeah.
Right. Well, Conga then.
Yeah, you're on the right track for that. And then in terms of the newsletter, you mentioned you use eye contact. Is it just for a newsletter or do you use it for outreach as well? How do you use the eye contact?
For the moment, we use it almost exclusively for newsletters or targeted e-blasts. We have, for personalized outreach, it really is done by the individual. It's one of the things that we think is very powerful and impactful. And I think Lisa could talk more about that, is building the relationship with the donor is not done through automation. It's done through person to person.
So what can people expect when they join your newsletter? Is it, learning about the current work you guys are doing on, or how can they get involved? Is there a call to action in that newsletter?
There are many, or there can be. As Lisa mentioned, one of the things that we love to focus on is storytelling, to bring a more personal component to the great projects and work that we're doing. Also, now that we're post-pandemic world, our events are coming back, so we get to hear all about the great events and fundraising opportunities that are coming with the OneDrop Foundation, as well as several articles that are written and expressed from great leaders in the WASH community.
Yeah, and especially last year, we were working on themes. So we had 4 themes, so per quarter basically, and so we were really talking about the theme and how it connected to the different SDGs. So 6 will always be there, as Tara said, which is safe water for all. Water and safe water for all, SDG 6, but then we were able to talk about, how that impacted other SDGs. So we had different thematics, which was really, really great. And so the newsletters would often pull from those themes as well, because they're linked to how we do our impact reporting and how we communicate with our donors and funders.
So aside from asking people to join your newsletter, and we can put a link in the show notes below, how else can people get involved in your organization?
Well, that's a good question. There's different ways, but there are employee engagement initiatives. So employees who have that possibility within the organization can say, "Hey, I'd like to be able to do something for OneDrop." They can organize a third-party fundraiser, and some of that money can be matched and sent over. If there are, CEOs or VPs of marketing or people who are working in sustainability, CSR, ESG, there's ways for them to speak with us, to talk about what are we doing and how they might be involved from, I'd say, a larger component. So being a corporate partner or a funder. We are, again, trying to really build our individual giving program. So obviously there's a way to be an annual donor, a monthly donor, a major gift donor, and eventually, not there yet, but even we want to get to planned giving at some point in time. So different ways people can get involved, and a lot of that information, they can find it on our website.
And if the dollar donation is difficult for you right now, then other ways that you can get involved is to just help us raise awareness, to follow and engage with our social media posts, following and subscribing to the newsletter, and helping be an amplification for the great works that OneDrop is doing.
Awesome. What's in the near-term future for then OneDrop? I know you mentioned there's a few long-term large projects already in flight, up to 2026, I believe you mentioned. Anything else that you'd like to see or improve upon with the OneDrop?
Well, like I mentioned before, we're really focusing right now on working with Indigenous communities in Canada. There's a great program will be actually launched in 2023, and it's called our Youth and Water Initiative, working with Indigenous youth around empowerment and working on social art projects in approximately 10 communities. So that's going to be launching in 2023. The scaling up of Lazos de Agua in Latin America. So a lot of information can be seen on our website, or we can be contacted to talk about that. But we also started doing something really cool this year, and it's called Water in Action. So we're trying to create a movement on a yearly basis where it's a fun run, whereby companies, the general public can get involved by participating in a fun run. So there's a way to raise money at the same time and raise awareness about our mission and what we're trying to do. And that's taking on quite a significant role in the organization. We want to do this on an annual basis. We did it in Montreal this year, but we're hoping to expand into other communities in Canada. And we're also doing a fun run in Las Vegas in May. But the best part is, if you can't come out to do a physical challenge at one of the event locations, schools, companies, and community members can do a virtual fun run in their own backyard. So really encouraging people to either get on the bandwagon on helping us out at the in-person races or virtually. And again, creating awareness. And we provide all the tools and the toolkits and the software that they need to get involved.
Awesome. So if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about the organization, where's the best places to go?
First and foremost, you can check out OneDrop.org, which is our website, our central hub. We are also on LinkedIn, OneDrop Foundation. We are on Facebook, OneDrop. We are on Twitter, OneDrop. We are on Instagram, #1DropWater. We are on YouTube. And if you would like to get in touch with Lisa or I directly, I think in the drop-down chat, we can have our emails there for you too.
Awesome. Lisa, Tara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Alex, for hosting us.
Thank you so much for hosting us, Alex.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me in the next Agents of Nonprofit.